as it relates to some of the work that I'm trying to do here at the university, relating to helping support the student population. I primarily work with on-campus students, but we do have a significant number of our transfer students online, and anticipate that growing over time as well. So the title of the presentation there is Understanding the Transfer Experience Insights for Student Success. You may notice some of the slides might look off from where I had to throw it on I made it in a Mac, but it's on a Windows machine. So apologies if it looks a little wonky in some places. But just for you to get to know me a little bit better, let's see. Is the clicker not working now? There we go. So as Rusty mentioned, my name's Chris. Right now, I am an undergraduate graduate from the psychology program here at Eastern. I got my master's in higher education from Eastern as well. Currently, I'm working on my doctorate in educational leadership, and my dissertation title is Putting Community Back in College, sort of a play on words there. I'm working with community college students. And what I'm really looking at is better understanding the influence of institutional agents on capital. So institutional agents being administrators, staff members, faculty, anyone really that's non-familial in a position in which they can influence students. And I also am a part of the AERA, American Educational Research Association. I'm actually going to their 2025 conference this year. I only have one peer-reviewed publication, and ironically enough, it has nothing to do with transfer whatsoever. It's actually regarding the principalship in secondary education and challenges with being a principal. So if you're randomly interested in that, feel free to take a look. Also, just a little bit about me personally. I also serve part-time in the military in the Army National Guard in Kentucky. Again, quite different from my higher education experience. I help with field artillery and artillery in the Army. So I think that's pretty unique and fun. Let's see. So a common theme that's a part of my training here really is this idea of working together, and as it relates to supporting student success. So on the slide there, you can see that I talk about really it's not, although the university is comprised of multiple units, multiple departments, multiple divisions, it's really not solely focused on them. In order for a student to truly be successful, we all, as you all may know, we have to work in tandem. And recruitment and enrollment, the area that I work in, is really only one tenet of the vast majority of student support services and transition services for this population. So that's going to be a common theme that is not just throughout this presentation, but really throughout the work that I'm trying to do here at the institution, is how do we, for me, bridge some of the knowledge gaps in the student population? How do we work together seamlessly to get students from not just a community college, from another four-year institution, from the workforce, over to EKU, maximize their credits, maximize their financial aid, and ultimately end up persisting and graduating. But I'd like to sort of take a step back. I found some of what I'm talking about in a previous training that I did a couple of years ago, and talk a little bit more about the human experience in general. Oftentimes, for me at least, working with students, higher education as a system seems really transactional. You have to apply. You have to send us your test scores or your transcripts. You have to do this. You have to enroll. You have to sign up for an event. You have to visit. But oftentimes what we're lacking is really a relationship-centered approach at times, right? I'm not saying that we're just solely transactional in higher education, but I think that's an important piece to focus on. And in this training, it was sort of depicted here on the slide many years ago. If you go around to Argentina, on these cave walls, you'll find individuals who have painted their handprints on these cave walls. And for me, that seems sort of like an individualized experience. So people coming in, painting their hands. I think we're fortunate in that we have ancestors that allow us to sort of see some of that. But funnily enough, if you move on to somewhere like France or Spain, you'll see the same depictions, but really sort of opposite. To me, this depicts sort of a collective expression, if you will. So you can sort of see their humans. I guess they're hunting large game, and I mean maybe one of the people there just got tired of picking berries and nuts and wanted to do something different. But both of these images to me were important to sort of highlight, because at the end of the day, not only are we working with students, we're just working with other people, whether that be with the student, with departments. And I want to keep the human experience in mind as we go throughout some of the work that we do with transfer as well. And then I pose a question there. You don't have to answer this unless you want to, but it says, what can we do together that none of us can do on our own? And that's sort of common to the themes that I'm going with here during this presentation, and again throughout the work that I do. I also actually took this quote from that training that I mentioned. And if people in the chat on Zoom want to sort of throw out their thoughts on what they think that quote means, I would love to hear. But it says, don't look with your eyes, look with your feet. And I don't know if anyone has any context to who this individual is, but in the past, was one of the primary workers, I think in Toyota, if I remember correctly. And he actually was walking down the assembly line and ended up finding some discrepancies that made them the leader in manufacturing vehicles at a significantly much more faster rate than their counterparts. So I thought that quote was just pretty interesting as I was putting this presentation together.
Chris, Jason Marion in the chat mentioned management by walking around.
Yeah, management by walking around. Yeah, that's a good answer. To me, that sort of just said to me, take action. So I think that resonates really well. And so now that I'm off my history lesson, jumping back into transfer in higher education, I previously on the slides had some puzzle pieces. I like using that metaphor as well, because to me, oftentimes their experience is mirroring what you see here on the slide. A very messy, chaotic. They maybe know of some of the puzzle pieces, and they maybe have an idea of what the end picture is, but it's scattered, right? It's messy. And I actually chose this picture too because in the not too recent past, actually went out and bought a puzzle because I thought I would be clever and find a new hobby. And I was about 30 minutes in, and I just put all the pieces back in the puzzle, and I just put it in the drawer because I got so frustrated. I couldn't really put that puzzle together in a quick manner. And then I also have sort of this image, and it sort of depicts what I think we see maybe sometimes as administrators. Like, we can see the whole piece. As faculty, we know our classrooms, we know our content areas. We obviously may have room for improvement or changes over time, but it's not like this image here to where we're completely lost and unsure. And I wanted to point out as well sort of why I'm sharing this with you. Why does some of this stuff matter? Why are we focusing on the transfer population at this point in time? I mean, arguably, I guess all students matter. We could say that, but you can read the points there. But I think workforce is one of the big opportunities, not just in Kentucky, but really nationwide. It says there 63% of our jobs will require a credential by 2031, but fewer than half of our population has one. And that to me is pretty significant. In the community college landscape alone, so I talk a lot about the community college because it's an area of interest, but 80% of those students intend to earn a bachelor's degree. So there is some intention behind that. However, about 1/3 transfer, and less than half of that actually end up graduating with the degree. So we have an 80% population coming in, 1/3 transfer, half of that actually get the degree, which to me is a huge challenge. And I don't think this challenge is new. This has existed over time, not just in context of higher education institutions, but the research itself. And I think that's significant. And I think we have a lot of room for improvement, at least when supporting them. And then I mentioned there, understanding and adopting the student's mindset. I go back to sort of humanizing that experience a bit. Maybe our first interaction with students is not completing a task. Maybe it's asking them how their day is. I mean, I know that sounds simple, but again, oftentimes students, native first-time freshman students are thrown a lot, but transfer students are also navigating a lot of unique instances in which they have to do things prior to coming here. And I pulled these pictures. These are pictures from the university. The top left is actually one from a transfer event that we housed. We invited our KCTCS system partners to come to campus and learn a little bit more about what we're doing in the academic realm, hear from some of our academic partners. But I also wanted to provide you all with sort of just a quick overview of who the transfer student population is. Excuse me. So I'll show here. I'm only looking at the fall 2024, so this is limited, but as you can see, the majority of our students are from Kentucky. Makes sense probably since we're a public regional university. We really have a commitment to our service region and serving those of Kentucky. But we do have a pretty good number of out-of-state students, and we're also expecting that number to grow over time as well. I also wanted to provide sort of a comparison to our freshman profile. So this was transfer. Freshman is nearly relatively the same. Out of state is a little bit less though in that regard. And then I wanted to go back to fall 2022 because I wanted to sort of paint or highlight something I found to be interesting. So I've actually separated this up by modality. Fall 2022, here's fall 2023, and here's fall 2024. So if you're not seeing this, you can look in the bottom left under the transfer section, and you're seeing the online transfer student grow over time and on-campus decrease. And that's sort of what we're still seeing as a trend. So to me, it's also important not just to talk about typical classroom experiences, although that is important, but how do we also support these students in a way that is distance learning or online? We know that's growing, so that's something I also want to sort of focus on as well. And then first generation, I just found that to be interesting, not too surprising though. 54% of the students are first gen. And then I also wanted to sort of highlight, again, this is just fall 2024, but some of our most popular programs. The very top program that's listed there is AGS. And if anyone in the chat also wants to respond to this, what do you all think would be the significance of AGS being a high transfer program? Does anyone have any thoughts? What's the significance of that?
Monitor the chat. Cassie in the chat says they are the ones who often fall through the cracks. And Jason Marion says uncertainty about transfer credits.
Yeah, both of those are exactly right. Falling through the cracks, transfer credits. To me, at least, in my opinion, this screams we need to focus on support services and transition services. And what I've found in feedback from students is they're simply not aware of all of the opportunities that could be presented to them. I know we have an excellent STEM center. I know we have a student success center. I know we have all of these great things, but one of my goals as well is getting that in front of students very early on. That way we can set them up for success as well.
There are a few more comments in the chat. Cassie mentioned many are first gen, and Lisa mentions it might be looking for a quick way to earn a credential online as well.
Yeah, so go sort of flipping that a little bit, quick credential. Yeah, because we have to think about too, we're not just solely focused on bachelor's degree recipients. Like I mentioned in my point earlier that we're looking at baccalaureate degrees, but We're also looking at students just simply trying to find a credential out of interest, maybe out of work, things like that. So yeah, cool. All right. So I wanted to sort of, again, revisit this puzzle and ask what are the challenges that or barriers that transfer students face. I gotten some feedback from a form I sent out yesterday asking about that. Some of that was related around advising. Some of that was related around advising loads as well, sort of looking on the faculty and saying, okay, we have a lot of students on our plate. But I think there are many challenges that we could talk about. Some things I wanted to highlight, though, was one here. Nearly 40% of transfer students do not receive credit that was previously completed, losing out on an average of, I can't quite see that there, but losing out on an average number of credits, which what we sort of call credit loss. And that's significant. They've been to another institution, they've paid, they've taken classes, they want to maximize the amount of aid that they're getting, or excuse me, the amount of credits that they're getting at their next institution. However, a lot of students, as you see, have credit loss. Some of that we can't really maybe fix, but some of that I think we do have some room for opportunity. Again, often approaches for transfer students are mirroring the needs of first-time freshmen, which is problematic. We know that transfer students are new to their receiving institution. They maybe have never used Blackboard, or maybe they only were used to a 5-minute walk to their classroom instead of 15, whatever the case may be. But the way we process, the way we communicate does not need to mirror first-time freshmen. They are very, very, very unique. Again, just talking about how their credits transfer and advising, that could be an hour-long conversation itself. So although students are new to the institution, are new students, we don't need to treat them like they're first-time freshmen, nor do they want to be treated that way. In the literature, it also says, in feedback from students, they know they're new, but they want what they want. They want the support services up front. They want the affordability factor up front, and they want to know their credits up front before making that transition. And then administrators and staff provide significant support. We know this. We support our students every single day. However, many times administrators don't fully understand the transfer population itself. So that's sort of why I'm doing some of these trainings, trying to do the work of sharing about this population, because maybe inadvertently they're having a poor transition experience. Maybe faculty and staff and administrators are helping them, but they just simply don't know the needs of the population. So that's some of the work that I'm trying to surround as well. And so if you are in an area of recruitment or enrollment management, you maybe many of times have heard this idea of a funnel. So you start broad, students interested, you get a little narrower, a little more narrow, a little more narrow, and then the point there is orientation, registration, enrollment, and then boom, they're done. For transfer students, I don't necessarily like sort of categorizing that in a funnel type approach. I put a picture up here. I like viewing it more as a roadmap to where students can hop off one exit, get back on, and move in and out, move a little more freely, if you will. I don't think it's as linear as the funnel approach. And I also wanted to sort of highlight some key areas I think that we can focus on all as higher ed professionals. One is orientation. Currently, for at least my on-campus transfer students, we don't have any type of orientating type of experience. We're helping them navigate that really point in time, in real time every day. So that's something that I'm working on helping address. Advising is huge. Like I mentioned earlier, credit loss is a significant challenge. Not just that, but sometimes students are indicating interest in Eastern, but not transitioning at the moment. Sometimes they're at the community college and they're there for another semester, another 2 semesters, or another 3, whatever it is. So not only are we advising our students, we're also advising students every semester in order for them to maximize the classes they're taking and then bringing back over here. And mentorship is really important as well. Based on some anecdotal feedback I have from just talking with students in my department, mentorship is something that is really meaningful to them. I recently did a survey asking them about some things that they would find important in a transition experience, and mentorship was high on that list. And mentorship oftentimes may be more formal. You have someone who is meeting with you regularly and so on and so forth. It doesn't have to be as formal though. It can simply be, you sharing advice here or there, you checking in every so often. They seem to value that a lot. Integration also. So we talk about integration in terms of the transition experience from their departing institution to their receiving institution. But also I really want to highlight persistence as well, because I think that's really, really important. Because if we work really hard to get transfer students here, but they ultimately don't even retain that next semester, that next year, then really they're missing out. And I think we can identify, again, some areas for growth there also. And then I've sort of characterized a few different points in time that I find important as well. Pre-enrollment, that's all of the work really that I do for our on-campus students, getting them ready, getting them prepared. And then their first semester, that is going to be the most important time for transfer students, just because they've just got here. They're oftentimes maybe jumping into major courses, depending on the amount of credits they have. That's a key point. And then, like I already talked about, persistence. Again, that is a very, very important part of this roadmap. And so I also wanted to provide some notes on what maybe we could do in the classroom. I'm sure many of us already do some of these things already, but for transfer students specifically, sometimes just simply asking them their experiences can really go a long way. I worked with a student who, like me, was serving part-time in the military. I've worked with students who's a parent, and I've worked with students who are just working at a company. They don't want to be here on campus. In fact, they want to maximize what they can do online. But I didn't get to know them until I started asking questions. So again, simple, but sometimes very significant. And then acknowledging the student holistically. Oftentimes we talk about, at least what I see in the literature, is academic integration and social integration. I've been doing some more reading on how those are sort of interconnected and how those transcend each other when we're working with students. So just acknowledge that and really just, again, this maybe go for any student, but just respect their different backgrounds, their life experiences. Bring that into the classroom. Use that as points when you're working with students. And then I have a question there. Again, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but if you have any thoughts on whether or not that question will be helpful for students, how does your prior experience shape your view of, this topic? So if you're in math, how does your prior experience in your college algebra class at Bluegrass sort of shape your knowledge in this class? Just things like that. And then moving on to really just providing expectations for students up front. Avoiding assumptions is something that I would really like to focus on. Again, going back to students feeling like they're first-time freshmen. Even though you may be in an intro or a class that is early on in a degree planning program, there may be students who've been to college for 4 years already. So really trying to avoid assumptions about students' prior academic experiences. Explaining jargon. Again, this is a simple one, but what does FERPA mean? What is FICTL? What are all of these things that students may not be aware about? Transfer policies is a huge one. We have certain limits and time periods in which a credit could count. Sometimes students are surprised by that when they get here to the institution and we say, hey, you're going to have to retake this Bio 307 because it's no longer, it doesn't count. Rubrics and examples of assignments, that's pretty simple. And then another question just to reflect on them in classroom management would, having a tutorial and research databases. I've recently had a student who told me they had no idea what the MyKU portal was. They didn't even use that at their previous institution. So really just understanding some of those challenges. And transfer students also do have feelings of isolation, and that's really important as well, because as they're coming in, yes, they have had previous experience, but they're in a completely new environment. They don't know the faculty, they don't know the staff, they don't know other students like them, so we need to connect them. So just acknowledging that and sort of helping that inside the classroom could be good. Rotating groups throughout the semester is never a bad piece of advice. And really going back to that mentorship, not just from a faculty administrator point, but a student point as well. Peer-to-peer interaction is found to be really, really significant for these students. And then finally, just support, flexibility. As we already know, students, not even transfer, students in general, again, they have all kinds of commitments. Their parents, their service members, their workers, they're all of the things, and they are having to juggle some of these responsibilities while trying to get this credential. So again, just having an understanding of that when you're working with these students as well. Deadlines, I mean, that, to each their own with flexibility and deadlines, but sometimes that can be helpful. Student hours that are maybe non-traditional in time can also be helpful. Again, another example, I was working with a student who couldn't talk to me unless it was like after, I think it was like after 7 in the evening or something. So just having an understanding there as well can help. And then I said mentorship earlier. I just want to hit on this a little bit more. This can be helping with aligning credits, obviously with their prior degree experience. We don't want redundancy. We don't want students having to take classes that they don't actually need, because oftentimes it creates a very frustrating experience for those students, especially if they've already been here and they either have already taken something, or at the end of the road we say, hey, oh, we forgot. Oops, you're not graduating on time. You need to take this class. And then something that I want to focus on as well is understanding their classification level as they're coming in. So if they are a junior standing student and they're done with general education classes, they're ready to go in the major, maybe we need to connect them a little bit earlier on with internship opportunities or job opportunities, or help prepare them for what graduation looks like, because maybe it's only another 2 semesters. I think that's also something important to note, because as they're coming in, they obviously don't want to wait 3 years to get an internship or to get that hands-on education. And then just promoting resources as well. Like I mentioned before, we have very excellent support services, tutoring centers, the studio here to help with writing, the psychology clinic, the counseling center. All of that is important, but what we keep finding, not over and over, but here or there, students are not aware of these resources, so they just don't use them, and we need to make sure they're aware of those. And then timely referrals, like I just said, not just saying, hey, here's the counseling center, but actually helping connect them to whatever they need. And then just some thoughts here as your role as if you're faculty or staff or whoever, really just having a lens of almost being a coach, sort of not hand-holding, but also hand-holding a little bit, if that makes sense, helping them navigate the complex processes, but helping them have an understanding of what they're doing, what that looks like, explaining to them why they need to meet academic readiness before they can take this class or what have you. Being an advocate for students, again, that's pretty simple, but listening to students' concerns, advocating for, especially for this population, because sometimes they don't necessarily advocate for themselves. And sometimes it's just simply they don't know what they don't know. And then building community, I've hit on this before, but again, going back to the human experience, I just find it really important. We're here at an institution. It can be so easy to sort of lose sight that they're not only here to get an education and to get the credential, but if you go outside and you look at the pillars that the students walk through the first week of orientation, I mean, some of those words on there, I think that transcends outside of the classroom a little bit. They're going through experiences that are changing them as a person. Maybe they've had a really bad experience at an institution previously, and they need some support. They need some community. So I just want to keep that in mind as well. With that, I think that's the end of my slides. I didn't really have too lengthy of a presentation here. I did want to leave room for some questions, though, if anyone had any questions or thoughts surrounding how we support this population better. But that's really all I got for the slides.
We'll monitor the Zoom room if anybody has any questions, or for faculty here in person. Chris, are you seeing that there is interest from transfer students or potential transfer students from certain geographic areas, or how does that look?
Nothing that I've noticed off of the top of my head at the moment. I do know we're seeing a little bit of growth out of West Virginia randomly. I've not really investigated that yet, so that's interesting to me. I think word of mouth is very powerful, and I think some students and some people around that community college in that area are starting to pick up on Eastern. Overall, I'm not sure. I have to look into the numbers a little bit more. I do know our out of state is growing, and I anticipate it continuing to grow. But what I'm really focused on as well is that on-campus online piece. I mean, we're seeing online rise up, which is not surprising to me, but I just think there's considerations there. Yeah.
Chris, I had a question about just the profile of different students. Obviously, we have students that are in person. We have students that are e-campus or online. As far as the student population that's coming in as transfers, do you see any major differences in those profiles, or does the literature that you've looked at, does it show that best practices or pedagogical tools that we should be using different types of tools with those populations of transfer students?
That's a good question. Most of what I've seen in the literature surrounding, and now you're asking the modality, right? So on campus and online. Most of what I'm seeing are the challenges are really pretty similar in nature, regardless of modality, and what they want to know. They want to know affordability. They want to know how their credits transfer, and they want to know that quickly as well. But as far as modality goes, I don't know that I've noticed any significant pedagogical differences aside from the challenge of interaction in online. I've not really dug into that much though. But I do think it's important though. We're never going to go away from a brick and mortar institution, but as we move to more and more online classes, something in the literature about orientation I thought was interesting was students did not like online orientations because they found it to be boring and text heavy. That's just a small minor point, but I think if we can think about ways to be interactive as a whole in distance education, I've seen some of that.
Chris, we have a question in the chat. We actually have a few. Maria Bain asks, what's the best way to identify a student as a transfer student? Usually she notices that they have transfer credits in degree works, but sometimes that is not immediately apparent. And it would be helpful to know going into the conversation.
That's another good question. The DegreeWorks tool is definitely a great tool to know and to look at. That can be a indicator in and of itself. Outside of that, something that I've sort of pitched out as an idea, and I would love faculty feedback on if you all have any, is having an indicator on class rosters. I don't think that we currently have that. I have thought that could be helpful, but definitely open to hearing your thoughts on that. But I don't know that there's a great way to immediately identify these students outside of just knowing your classroom at the moment. But again, I like to explore that roster idea.
Okay. I'm going to post that to the chat as well. Jason Marion asks a question: does the university provide any resources for helping transfer students connect with off-campus living, identifying housing options, etc.? Do students coming from two-year environments close to their home may be interested in affordable living options if they are now on their own for housing?
Yeah, as far as I know in the work that I'm doing, we don't. And that's another area I'm trying to grow. Maybe not even necessarily resources in terms of budget, but just in terms of information, knowledge. I have students I talk with all of the time that don't want to live on campus. They're looking for an apartment or whatever. Maybe they're living with a parent, or they're just working in the area. So we don't, but I think there's room for improvement.
Okay. Cassie mentioned a cohort attribute would be nice. Yeah,
I hadn't thought about that. There was some other feedback I had gotten yesterday that someone mentioned maybe GSD, especially with the move of that. That could be a good class to sort of try to throw some of that information into. So happy to hear feedback or thoughts on that as well. I think that would be an excellent way. Now, not every transfer student takes that, of course, but it would be something.
Okay.
And I'm also interested in if any faculty want to comment on the feedback I gotten regarding advising load. I know I can sit here and say that we need to advise better, we need to advise more, what have you, but if advising load is a challenge, I'd love to hear more about that too.
Okay. All right. Well, while everyone is thinking about that, Maria Bain mentions in the chat, what would be the typical interaction with the transfer center for transfer students? For example, do they get assigned a specific advisor? Do they have periodic meetings? Is there a deadline for submitting transcripts to EKU? What are the typical first steps on their roadmap? Great question.
That is a great question, and it varies. Sometimes in fact, a lot of times students will just go directly to the application. They'll immediately apply to the institution. Why that's significant for us is because we try to have a touch point as early on as possible. And a lot of the things that they need to be aware of, maybe prior to that application. But it's tough too, right? Because I only work with on-campus students. EKU Online has their own processes, has their own procedures that actually vary quite differently than what we do in our transfer center for the on-campus students. But their first touch point is either going to be an application or them coming into our CRM. And then outside of that, we do have some deadlines for submission of materials or scholarships and things like that. And then I'm trying to think. And what was the last part of that question there, Rusty?
Sure. What are the typical first steps on their roadmap?
Oh, yeah, first steps. So there, in addition to that, is getting their credits recorded as well. And sometimes, I wouldn't say it's a challenge, but it's just an area in which there's some time involved. So sometimes courses have to go out for review to departments, and that can take anywhere from a day to 3 weeks. So students are sort of in limbo, maybe with advising, for example, whenever that happens.
Okay.
So that's another first step as well.
And Jamie Woolery in the chat asks, have you considered peer-to-peer mentoring for transfer students?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have, but honestly, I'm a little nervous because I don't want to start something and see it fizzle out. So I don't know. I would like to explore that, but I think I might need to tighten up some of our current processes first, in terms of the transition experience before I do that.
Okay, and Jason Marion mentions, in his program, we have faculty interested in recruiting at two-year institutions, including KCTCS and out-of-state schools, since our students from KCTCS have done very well. Does EKU or CPE have transfer scholarships? And if so, what should we share with others or get more info? That is, KCTCS reports that retention rates of transfer students to four-year degrees are better than traditional track students. Any thoughts?
Yeah, we have institutional scholarships for on-campus students, regardless of whether or not they're a community college or a regular transfer. What's convenient for students, we divvy that up by number of earned hours post high school. And so if students have 23 or less, then they just qualify for what our freshman population qualifies for in terms of scholarship. And that's going to be based off of their high school GPA. Similarly, for 24 or greater hours, we have our own transfer merit model for on-campus students, ranges from 4,000 to 1,000 annually, and that's based off of their transfer GPA coming in. So we do have that opportunity. We also have a partnership with the community college system that we've had for quite a while. It's called our Kernel Connection program. You may have heard of it or may have not. So it locks a student into a catalog year. They are still at the KCTCS institution, but we intentionally help them every semester. We receive their coursework automatically. They can also be engaged if they so choose in some of the E3 experiences, the concerts, the games, things like that. And they can also take some classes concurrently at the KCTCS rate. So some programs over others are more important to focus on for that concurrent. And then outside of Kernel Connection, we also have reverse transfer that's starting to get a little bit bigger as well. So students who transfer here can then reverse transfer back and get that credential at that institution.
Thanks, Chris.
All great questions.
I have a suggestion about advising this. So it's not going to apply to all programs, but when we have a transfer student, this is Jen Spock. I'm from History, Philosophy, and Religious Studies, and all of the history faculty advise. And when we have a transfer student come in who is coming in as a history major declared, whether they were one before or not, that's not terribly complicated, no matter how many credits they've got. There's usually no trouble. But if they're coming in as a history teacher, and at EKU, there's only one credit of elective in that major here. So that's really, really complicated. And the way, and a lot of times, history teaching also requires a certain GPA before you can apply to the actual teaching program, which usually happens in the junior year. And for transfer students, very often can't happen for a variety of reasons. And the way that our department has handled helping them better is, and this is why I'm here, just listening, because the department designated me, because I've been advising for more than 20 years, that anyone who's a history teaching major is supposed to get sent to me first, not even go to education or anything like that. They come to me first. And as soon as their transfer credits are populated, and then I work with them on actually creating a curriculum guide to graduation personally for each of them. And we have a serious conversation about GPA if needed. We talk about options if it's just not possible for them to get out, because usually there's an additional semester at the very least, if not an additional year beyond 4. But it's worked really, really well to have one point person in the department to handle that more complicated program for all the teaching majors. And then And then they get passed on to their regular advisor, who then works with them. So I end up seeing hopefully most of the history teaching transfer. And this is whether they're transferring from another institution or from another major at EKU, which can be just as complicated.
Mm-hmm.
So it's worked really well to have one point person for that, just to get them started, clarify stuff, and then turn them over to their regular advisor. It's worked for us for a few years now. It may be helpful to some other departments for certain programs.
Yeah, I think that could definitely be helpful. And I think having a point person can also be significant just because we've accumulated maybe so much knowledge that is complex for the transfer experience. Like I was even reminded this morning, a colleague reminded me that two KCTCS math classes we can equate to pre-calculus here. Had I not remembered to ask about that, I would have told this student to take a math class they didn't need to take. So that's important. But that was also why I was interested in hearing about the workload feedback as well, because again, one person, in addition to not just working with that population, but any student, that could be a lot of work. Yeah.
I don't have any of my own advisees, but then I'm a backup person for different programs. So there's a reason for that.
Yeah. Cool. Other questions that anyone has or comments?
Other questions from Zoom? Maria asks, any comments on how changes to gen ed or essential education will change the transfer experience? Timely question.
That is a timely question. I don't know much about that. I'd like to explore that more, especially as it relates to the population. I've just not really dug into essential education in its entirety yet. So I will learn as well. We'll see.
So stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. I also I was going to have a resource toolkit shared out as well. So if anyone's interested in like a few one-pager documents, whether it be advising focused or the population focused as well, I'd be happy to send that out to everyone here whenever that's ready.
Excellent. So I'm sure that there would be a good deal of interest, and for anybody that would be interested, please feel free to email us and we'll make sure to get that to you and to compile the resources. Again, Chris has been working on this project and helping us to understand our transfer population better, so as to develop those teaching and learning resources and to contribute to that resource. So, or that research, so that if faculty are teaching courses, like I mentioned in the chat, that are or tend to be based on institutional data or schedules higher in terms of transfer student populations, that faculty, one, will have access to the information if they choose to access it, and then two, some approaches, some evidence-based approaches for working with those populations of students, that transfer population. And so it's a work in progress. I will say that there was an invitation in the chat if faculty would find some sort of indicator as an option in their class roster, indicating that a student is transferring in from another institution. If they would find that useful, we're trying to gather some input. The feedback that I've received so far from faculty is there is high potential for usefulness, depending on how it's implemented. One concept is that it could be as simple as a color-coded letter T in an area next to a student's name. What has been fascinating in the research that Chris has been doing and pulling some of this data is that across, and Maria asked about essential education. That's one of the areas that we queried. How many of our students enrolled in gen ed or essential education courses are transfer students, and are there certain courses with higher populations of transfer students than others? And so he has gone from a very large list of courses to a smaller list of courses, and we are close to being able to provide that information to faculty. But right now, in looking at a class roster, there is no efficient way to tell what the configuration of a course might be. Faculty probably know, if they've taught the course multiple times or teach multiple sections, they might know. But the question is whether that information would be useful up front. And Maria mentioned an indicator in the advisor roster would be helpful. She doesn't always have her advisees in class. Thanks, Maria. That's useful to know. And so these are some things to think about and to consider, but we want more faculty input on those ideas as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Are there any other questions from the Zoom room? Okay. Don't see anybody coming off of mute or adding to the chat. So any other questions from in person? Okay. Chris, why don't you close us out?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you all for attending. Again, if the resources that I plan to share out would be helpful, feel free to reach out to me. If anyone's interested in some of the data dashboards or the data set that Rusty and I were talking about, also happy to connect you with that as well. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Chris.